This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The latest in the racial justice protests in the United States. China releases white paper on COVID-19 fight and reveals massive spending to fight the virus. And Ghanaians out in numbers as worship places reopen after 3 months of closure. Hello and thank you for joining us on Africa Live. I am Peninah Karibe. Also coming up this hour. Female genital mutilation rises in Somalia as girls stay home during lockdowns. And in sports, the Africa Rally Championship takes a hit from coronavirus. We start in the United States, where protests against racism and police brutality continue across the country. In New York City, the curfew has been lifted 1 day ahead of schedule, but it all began in Minneapolis, where an unarmed black man, George Floyd, died after a police officer knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes, triggering the current protests. Dan Williams joins us live now from Minneapolis for more on this. Dan, the Black Lives Matter protests have been going on for nearly 2 weeks now. The last week has seen violence, looting and fires. What's the situation now on the ground?
Well, as you can probably see behind me, it's all very peaceful now, and it has been here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul now for almost a week. Last weekend, it was really punctured by violence, of arson, of looting and other images, including police using tear gas and rubber bullets against protesters. But since then, really since Monday, when Terrence Floyd, George Floyd's brother, came to visit this spot, this is the spot where George Floyd was killed almost 2 weeks ago. When Terrence Floyd came here, he talked very much about peaceful protests, and really since then that is really what we've seen here. This is the sacred space, as I say. This is the spot where George Floyd was killed, and it's an eclectic mix of music, of art, of people breakdancing, playing piano, and also leaving flowers, leaving their respects to George Floyd as well, writing messages. And we're also hearing speakers as well, people coming up talking about messages of justice for George Floyd, as well as more long-term changes to end systemic racism as well, that being the overriding message. So it is all very peaceful here. We are having a number of significant protests still. There was one yesterday at the governor's residence, the Minnesota governor's residence, and there's further protests planned here for later. But of course, really the focus now here, the tension, if you like, is building towards the first court date for Derek Chauvin. He's the police officer that was filmed kneeling on George Floyd for nearly 9 minutes. He appears in court for the first time here on Monday. So that's really where a lot of the focus and the potential tension is now coming from the Minneapolis region.
Okay, so let's talk about another 2 police officers who were seen pushing an elderly man during protests in Buffalo. They were charged on Saturday. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, these 2 police officers, it's a confusing picture, it has to be said, taking place in Buffalo, New York. These 2 police officers, they appeared in court. They've been charged with felony assault. But outside the court, there were some 100 or so officers, firefighters and others that were there to support these 2 officers. And in fact, 57 officers, part of this special unit, they resigned following the news of these 2 arrests from that unit. So it is a slightly confusing picture. It all stems back to this viral video that we saw of this 75-year-old white man, Martin Gugino, who was appears to be pushed by police there, stumbling back and hitting his head on the floor. It appears that we can see blood coming out of his ear. But the other kind of slightly confusing point to be made from that is that Buffalo police had initially said that the man had stumbled and fell, and then that statement, after we saw this viral video, was then withdrawn, and then we saw this action taken against these police officers. So it's certainly an incident that raises a whole host of questions that we hope to get some answers to over the course of the next period of time.
And Dan, what are health officials saying about how these protests are affecting the fight against COVID-19 and the infection rates there in the US?
Yeah, this is now being described by some as a tale of two pandemics and a tale almost of the two public kind of health issues. You've obviously have COVID-19 and you have racism. Now, COVID-19, we know widely from the impacts that the US has suffered from. There's been more than 110,000 deaths so far. There's been almost 2 million COVID-19 positive test results here. But we also have this other issue as well of racism in America, and of course the African Americans are the group that have been most hit by COVID-19. The mortality rate is more, the economic impacts are more. So we have these two elements in a way playing out at the same time, and of course many people here, as you can probably see behind me, many are wearing masks, many are not. And we'll only really see if there's a spike, experts say, around 2 weeks from now, whether there is any further spikes from these protests. And of course, it is the perfect conditions for further transmission of the virus, protests where people are speaking loudly and even protesting, and the use of tear gas and other elements, which also exacerbates the issue. But this will only kind of obviously know whether that has had any real major spike a couple of weeks from now. But of course, there are also those here, experts that say that this is also, there's a chance to end systemic racism. It feels different this time round, and that is why many people of all races, genders and ages are coming out in force to have their voices heard, because there is a feeling that there is a chance at least to make some progress in terms of that issue, even if, and that for some, that's just a risk worth taking.
All right, Dan, thank you very much for that. Dan Williams, live for us in Minneapolis. Now, rallies against racism are being held across Europe in the wake of American protests promoting racial justice and an end to police brutality. The demonstrations are in response to the killing of George Floyd, an unarmed African-American man who died in police custody. Thousands of people in London attended protests to voice their anger. In Spain, protesters gathered outside the US Embassy in Madrid to show their support for the Black Lives Matter movement. In France, more than 23,000 people took to the streets calling for justice for Floyd and others who suffer from violent law enforcement.
It's important for me to be here today because I'm one of the victims of the systematic racism which exists in France and in the United States. And I think that despite me being a victim, oppressors need to understand we're speaking together. We're reacting and doing things together, and that's why I am one of the many to protest here today.
I'm here today to show solidarity with George Floyd, who died in America, and I came to bring my children to witness a black protest, to be part of something transformative. So I believe this protest will bring about a change in race relations in the United Kingdom.
Hopefully this is not a one-time thing and there's change, and looking at the different races that are here today, I feel like we're making a change, even if it's a little percentage, but we're making a change in history.
Let's now head to Libya, where Tripoli residents have been celebrating their administration's recent victories in the 14-month-long conflict between Government of National Unity Forces and forces loyal to Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar. GNA forces are now sustaining their push to capture the strategic city of Sirte. Fighting has slowed down on the city's outskirts. Sirte is the gateway to oil fields in eastern Libya. The Turkish-backed GNA forces have retaken major outposts from Haftar's troops around Tripoli. Haftar was in Cairo Saturday, where he supported a proposal by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi calling for a ceasefire. The ceasefire is supposed to take effect on Monday. The proposal, called the Cairo Declaration, calls for a withdrawal of all foreign mercenaries fighting in Libya. It also calls for the confiscation of weapons and the dismantling of militias. Meanwhile, a GNA spokesperson declared that his side will decide when the fighting ends.
They are celebrating the victories in Tripoli. The children are here and there are a lot of people. Despite everything, we persisted and achieved victory, and we will keep doing so. We will clean Libya of everyone who opposes a civil state, which we need to leave for the young generations and avoid repeating the same mistake.
From one victory to another against strongman Khalifa Haftar and his fake soldiers. Yes, I said that.
Khalifa Haftar now wants to hold discussions when it is over and he has no more power. Libya will remain and a great victory will be achieved across Libya, God willing.
China has released a white paper titled Fighting COVID-19, China in Action. The document sets out the timelines and details of China's efforts to contain the novel coronavirus. So Yuting has more.
抗击新冠肺炎疫情的中国行动白皮书。
A virus respects no borders, and human life is the top priority. And it's time for joint efforts rather than playing the blame game. Those are the clear messages in a recently released white paper, which says China firmly opposes stigmatization and politicization of the virus.
有些外国的政客和媒体
Some foreign politicians and media have created the presumption of guilt over the virus origin. They label the virus and politicize the epidemic. They also cook up theories that China is where the virus originated and China has hidden information about the virus, which are all groundless. It's unreasonable and shows no respect to science.
She added that China rejects any baseless accusations. China has always acted with openness, transparency, and responsibility, and informed the international community of developments about the epidemic in a timely manner. The white paper says that at the end of May, over 160 billion yuan had been allocated by governments of all levels, equal to nearly $23 billion. As a result, China achieved a recovery rate of 94.3%. The country has done everything it can to save lives and also offer help to other countries in saving lives and restoring social and economic operations.
China is playing an active part in delivering the G20 debt relief initiative for the poorest countries. We have announced debt payment suspension for 77 developing countries and regions.
The most emphasized keywords in this white paper are solidarity and cooperation. China has been sticking to the principles of people-oriented and life first. During the recent World Health Assembly, President Xi Jinping has emphasized the building of a public health community for mankind, which means that China will not only ensure the health and safety of its own citizens, but also the global public health. Su Yuting, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching Africa Live. We're taking a short break. We'll be right back. Female genital mutilation continues to claim lives in Somalia, a country that has the world's highest rate of FGM. Activists say the practice has increased during lockdowns induced by the COVID-19 pandemic. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Belu has more.
Activists are reporting an increase in female genital mutilation, with circumcisers said to be taking advantage of the suspension of learning institutions to carry out the practice in towns and rural areas of the country. The practice is prohibited under the country's constitution, but statistics from the UN's Children's Agency indicates that 98% of girls and women in Somalia have undergone FGM.
It's not done publicly now, but it is done secretly, mostly in rural areas. Women take their girls to elderly women who carry out the practice. It has become hard to eradicate FGM in our society.
It's still there, it's still happening. It's very hard to tackle it. because, as I said, it has become part of our culture, whereby girls who are not cut, they're not able to get married. It has created a sense of stigma to those girls who have not been cut.
Across the country, activists have teamed up to educate local communities on ways to eradicate the practice. But movement restrictions have hampered the exercise, with many cases reportedly taking place in rural areas.
We would like to create awareness to the society at large by engaging the religious leaders, the youth, the elderly people, the government, the parents of the girls, and also the girls on the realities and the risks of FGM. And also, we would like to appeal to the government to try and pass the sexual offense bill.
The Somali government says it remains committed to ending female genital mutilation, but it hasn't publicly sentenced those found engaging in the practice. The UN Population Fund estimates close to 300,000 girls will be cut in Somalia in 2020. The government hopes a sexual offense bill will help end the illegal practice. Activists are pressuring Parliament to pass it into law before elections next year.
Justice for young girls and women, how women and girls can have a justice that actually work for them. The sexual offences bill, the FGM bill, and how these different stakeholders can mobilize and move forward a strategy to implement those.
Efforts to end the practice have suffered a series of setbacks. A section of traditional elders and religious leaders advocate for FGM, while girls who haven't undergone the procedure face pressure from society. And as the debate continues, girls and young women also continue to lose their lives due to complications arising from the practice. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Multiple aid agencies, including the World Food Programme, have warned that millions across Africa could struggle to feed themselves due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Kenya, like many other African countries, has instituted coronavirus lockdown measures. CGTN's Nick Mudimba took a closer look at how these measures have affected the country's food supply chain.
Farmers across the continent have been hard hit in recent months by flooding, locust infestation, and now the coronavirus pandemic. For Africa's estimated 33 million smallholder farmers, these are difficult times. John Muturi Njoroge is a small-scale farmer in a part of Kenya that has good soil and enjoys plenty of rain. He is helped by his mother and brothers to cultivate the land. They earn their living by selling some of their produce, but the pandemic has adversely affected their lives and livelihoods.
My farming has really gone down due to COVID-19 because we are not selling anything. Many customers are stuck at home due to the lockdowns. There is no money, and when we sell our products, we sell them at very low prices.
Nathaniel Peterson is the vice president of Busara, a research and advisory firm dedicated to advancing and applying behavioral science. He is also an advisor to the World Food Programme. He is hopeful of better days ahead for many farmers.
I think WFP and some of these other major international organizations are thinking really well about how they can transport food and encourage farmers to produce. I think the one problem we have now is that everyone knows that agriculture production is really important right now. And a lot of people are telling farmers different types of information that may compete with each other. It may actually increase their uncertainty. And what we know in behavioral economics is that when people feel uncertain, sometimes they can kind of recoil a bit.
A visit to one of Kenya's biggest food markets in the capital Nairobi shows that it's teeming with quality and bountiful produce, but the prices here have worried traders and farmers alike.
Now, as you can see behind me, it's a beehive of activity in this market. Yes, the shoppers, the clients are not here, but the vendors are complaining of lack of traffic, meaning the prices have actually gone really down, and they're hoping soon that things will be back to normal.
At the moment, people are afraid of coming to the market. It depends on the numbers of virus patients that they hear about. Mostly, they buy their products near their homes and don't come here.
Farmers have been largely left to fend for themselves during these tough times.
At the moment, I am doing everything by myself. I have to look for seeds, fertilizers, so when I sell the little that I have, I need to prioritize all those, including feeding my family.
It's a big farm John and his family are cultivating, as you can see, and the motive is to put food on the table. It hasn't been an easy ride since COVID-19 knocked in sub-Saharan Africa, and farmers like him are now putting heads together with the family for one motive: to put food on the table. They have to be very creative also in the markets because the prices are very actually down, and also the fact that the products are lying idle after harvesting. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
In Ghana, places of worship have begun to reopen after nearly 3 months of closure due to the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
Members of the Christ Apostolic Church in Accra are taking safety precautions to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. This is the first Sunday service in the church after nearly 3 months when such religious gatherings were banned because of an outbreak of the coronavirus in Ghana.
We are looking up to God. He has power over everything. So we will be praying to him, and we are praying to him that if we have not gotten the vaccines or the medicine that can cure coronavirus, in his own wisdom, he grants us the wisdom and then give us medicine or solution to COVID-19.
On Friday, mosques were opened to Muslims for the congregational prayer, Juma. Worshippers had their temperatures taken and were all made to sanitize their hands and wear face masks before entering the mosque.
We assume that everybody who comes here doesn't know the rules. That's why we place our men from the entrance up to the door of the mosque. So the men are here to help. And anybody who proves difficult would ask our men to drive him and then say he should go home.
Although the government has now eased restrictions, only 100 people are allowed to worship at a time. However, there are still fears about the spread of the coronavirus, which is why this church had fewer than 100 people.
While this church has opened for worshippers, there are many others that have decided to remain shut. Their leaders say it's still risky to allow people in because compliance with safety measures could prove difficult.
So they are using social media platforms like Facebook to deliver sermons to their followers, but some prefer to go to the church or the mosque to worship.
I am very happy to join the service at church today. I never thought the government would lift the ban, so we begin to hold congregational service again.
We thought that we would have to meet or congregate during the month of Ramadan. Unfortunately, we couldn't. So now that the mosques have been opened, I think it's a great opportunity for us to worship in congregation, observing the social distancing and all the protocols that we're supposed to do.
While people can now hold congregational prayers, it could take some time for many to adjust to all the safety precautions, and this could lead to further spread of COVID-19. But the government has warned it will close down churches and mosques that fail to ensure strict compliance with the safety measures. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And coming up in sports, Africa Rally Championship takes a